This is the Book of Abraham, which we came across in public domain, public access. No copyright infringement was intentional. The Book of Abraham, its authenticity established as a divine and ancient record with copious references to ancient and modern authorities, by George Reynolds, 1842 to 1909. Publication date 1879. Underneath there is some information. No copyright page found. Reviews. And this person says the Book of Abraham is true. Maxwell Silverhammer is full of hot air, but not much substance. A previous reviewer gave this work a nasty review, the one below this, which was rather unrelated to the actual book presented here on this website, presumably because its title would draw lots of believers in the Book of Abraham, and thus he wanted to place his propaganda directly beneath the actual content. Well, if he gets to write such an irrelevant review unrelated to the actual book listed on this page, then this commentator supposes that he can also do the same via a positive review. He wouldn't even comment on the book above, written by George Reynolds, which may indeed furnish even further evidence of the authenticity of the Book of Abraham than what the commentator, writes here. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that the Book of Abraham is a true record and a true translation. There are multiple witnesses to this fact, so this person claims. Although they may not conform to standard academic procedures and policies. One book which does a marvellous job of establishing the authenticity of the Book of Abraham is Written by the Finger of God by Joe Sampson, 1993. That book speaks for itself. No amount of anti-Mormon rhetoric will be able to dislodge or disparage its data in the eyes of the reader who studies it with genuine diligence and does their own sincere homework, not simply googling blog articles written by ignorant skeptics. Furthermore, a less important, although still intriguing, defence of the Book of Abraham is given by Kerry Molestein of BYU, Brigham Young University, in his lecture, and there's a link there. The simple thrust of his lecture is that the knowledge of man and our modern scholars is quite limited, which is all too vividly illustrated every few centuries or even decades or less. Molestein does not state this, but the fact is that current science itself has major defects in it, in every branch thereof, including but not limited to physics, medicine, chemistry, geology, astronomy, and many others. It would take far too long of a comment to delineate all the flaws and deficiencies of our current scientific field, but suffice it to say that the glaring flaws are there if one looks hard enough and open-mindedly enough. Molestein correctly points out it is folly to place the wisdom of man above the revelations of God, especially those which he gives personally to our own spirits. There are no major problems with our modern history and narrative of reality. Who's to say that our knowledge of ancient languages such as Egyptian is not also deficient? There are many arguments for and against such positions, but this commentator didn't personally say that he studied the works of some of the most brilliant linguists around, and time and again he's seen those experts unwittingly furnish information which confirms the authenticity of Joseph Smith's translation of the Book of Abraham. Some of these feats he simply could not have accomplished without divine help beyond the limitations of the human kin. Was that supposed to be kin? In summary, it's easy to believe the anti-Mormon and anti-Joseph Smith propaganda and lies which have spread like wildfire across the internet today. But the true seeker of truth will remember the wise words of the poet Alexander Pope. A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pyrenean spring. These shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. So it is with attempting to unravel the supposed hidden story behind Joseph Smith in all its facets. There are far too many people out there today gobbling up half-digested bits of information vomited all over the creation, without doing any careful thinking, research, pondering, study, or prayer for themselves. They instead rely on the vomit of others to subsist upon, which Isaiah rather clearly warned us against in Isaiah 28. Okay, this was going to the extremes here with these vomit wordings. And this other commentator, he puts this as the title subject, Three Stooges authenticity. Nyuk, nyuk, nyuk. Remember the Three Stooges? Probably don't. Terrible propaganda piece by LDS, or Latter-day Saints. According to Mormon writers, the Book of Abraham was supposed to have been written on papyrus by Abraham about 4,000 years ago. This very same papyrus, it is claimed, was acquired by Joseph Smith in 1835, as was the one from Egypt, the Egyptian papyrus in it. Mummy's tomb. Only he could translate it, because only he was the only one in America that knew how to, that spoke the language, etc. So, how lucky for him. Smith translated the papyrus and published it under the title, The Book of Abraham. It was accepted by the Mormon Church as scripture and is now published as part of the Pearl of Great Price, one of the 4 standard works of the Church. For many years, Joseph Smith's collection of papyri was lost, but on November 27, 1967, the Mormon-owned Deseret News announced that the collection of papyrus manuscripts, long believed to have been destroyed in Chicago 5, 1871, was presented to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Metropolitan Museum of Art on a certain day. The importance of this find cannot be overemphasized, for now Joseph Smith's ability as a translator of an ancient Egyptian writing can be put to an absolute test. When the papyri were located, many members of the church felt that Joseph Smith's work would be vindicated. As it turned out, however, within 6 months from the time the Metropolitan Museum gave the papyri to the church, the Book of Abraham had been proven untrue. The fall of the Book of Abraham was brought about by the identification of the actual fragment of papyrus from which Joseph Smith translated the Book of Abraham. This was made possible by comparing it with the handwritten manuscripts. Dr. James R. Clark of Brigham Young University gave this information. There are in existence today in the church's historian's office what seem to be 2 separate manuscripts of Joseph Smith's translation from the papyrus rolls. One manuscript is the alphabet and grammar. Within this alphabet and grammar there is a copy of the characters, together with the translation of Abraham 1:4-28. The Story of the Pearl of Great Price, 1962, paragraph 172 to 73. Was it paraphrase? In the publication Pearl of Great Price Conference, December 10, 1960-1964, ed. Paraphrase, maybe. Paragraph 60 to 61. Dr. Clark referred to a longer manuscript. I have in my possession a photostatic copy of the manuscript of the Prophet Joseph Smith's translation of Abraham 1:1-2:18. The characters from which our present Book of Abraham was translated are down the left-hand column and Joseph Smith's translation opposite, so we know approximately how much material was translated from each character. All of the first 2 rows of characters on the papyrus fragment can be found in the manuscript of the Book of Abraham that is published in Joseph Smith's Egyptian alphabet and grammar. On the cover of this tract is a photograph of the original fragment of papyrus from which Joseph Smith was supposed to have translated the Book of Abraham. A careful examination of the original manuscripts in the handwriting of Joseph Smith's scribes reveals that Smith used less than 4 lines from this papyrus to make 49 verses in the Book of Abraham. These 49 verses are composed of more than 2,000 English words. Klaus Baer, an Egyptologist at the University of Chicago, concluded concerning the scene fragment. Joseph Smith thought that this papyrus contained the Book of Abraham. Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, autumn 1968, page 111. Although the noted Mormon apologist Dr. Hugh Nibley later proposed some fantastic theories in an attempt to divorce the Egyptian papyri from the Book of Abraham at a meeting held at the University of Utah on May 20, 1968. He frankly spoke of the fact that the very definite fact that one of the fragments seemed to supply all of the symbols for the Book of Abraham. This was the little Sin scroll Here are the symbols. The symbols are arranged here, and the interpretation goes along here, and the interpretation turns out to be the Book of Abraham. When Egyptologists translated this piece of papyrus, they found that it contained absolutely nothing concerning Abraham. Instead, it turned out to be a pagan funerary text known as the Book of Breathings, a work which actually evolved from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The Book of Breathings did not come into existence until the later stages of Egyptian history, just a few centuries before the time of Christ. Like the Book of the Dead, it was buried with those who died in ancient Egypt. It is filled with magic and pagan gods. It was obviously written by a very superstitious people and is quite different from the religion taught in the Bible. The fact that the papyrus Joseph Smith used as the basis for his Book of Abraham is in reality the Book of Breathings cannot be disputed because the name Book of Breathings appears clearly on the fourth line of the fragment. In 1968, two Egyptologists from the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute, Professors John A. Wilson and Klaus Bayer, identified the papyrus as the Book of Breathings. A translation by Klaus Bayer was printed in Dialogue, a journal of Mormon thought, autumn 1968, pp 119-20. Professor Richard A. Parker, chairman of the Department of Egyptology at Brown University, also translated the papyrus. Professor Hugh Nibley stated that Parker is the best man in America for this particular period and style of writing. Professor Parker's translation reads as follows. Something missing here. This great pool of Khonsu, Osiris, Hor, maybe that's supposed to be Horus, justified, or just to say Osiris Hor, as it's written, justified, born of Taykibit, a man likewise. After his two arms are fastened to his breast, one wraps the Book of Breathings, which is with writing both inside and outside of it, with royal linen, it being placed at his left arm, near his heart, this having been done at his wrapping and outside it. If this book be recited for him, then he will breathe like the souls of the gods, forever and ever. Dialogue, a Journal of Mormon Thought, Summer 1968, page 98. Except for a few minor variations, other renditions of the text are in agreement with Professor Parker's. The Book of Abraham, therefore, has been proven to be a spurious translation. Egyptologists find no mention of either Abraham or his religion in this text. The average number of words that the Egyptologists used to convey the message in this text is 87, whereas Joseph Smith's rendition contains thousands of words. In one case, Joseph Smith derived 177 English words out of the word con, or hon, because the K is not pronounced, as in the Hebrew cam, it's actually ham, and same with the Egyptian, or kim, it's him. The name of an Egyptian moon god. It is impossible to escape the conclusion that the Book of Abraham is a product of Joseph Smith's imagination. Since the original papyrus contains nothing about Abraham, some Mormon apologists have suggested that Joseph Smith may have obtained the Book of Abraham by way of direct revelation, and not from the papyrus. Those who try to use this escape will find themselves trapped by the words of Joseph Smith himself. At the beginning of the handwritten manuscript, Joseph Smith asserted that it was a translation of the Book of Abraham, written by his own hand, Abraham's own hand, upon papyrus, and found in the catacombs of Egypt. The introduction to the Book of Abraham still maintains that it was translated from the papyrus by Joseph Smith. Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Abraham, introduction. If the Book of Abraham is not an actual translation of the papyrus, then it is obvious that the introduction to it that appears in the Pearl of Great Price is a complete misrepresentation. Joseph Smith not only claimed that he translated it from the papyrus, but according to the History of the Church, volume 2, page 351, he affirmed that it was a correct translation. The contents of the Book of Breathings are certainly foreign to the teachings concerning Abraham found in the Bible. The Bible says he rejected paganism, whereas the Book of Breathings is filled with pagan gods and practices. The names of at least 15 Egyptian gods or goddesses are mentioned on the Sen papyri, which Joseph Smith had in his possession, but there is not one word about Abraham. The Mormon leaders face a serious dilemma. They cannot repudiate the Book of Abraham without raising the question of Joseph Smith's ability to translate the Book of Mormon. Now we're going to have a look inside this particular book. The Book of Abraham. Its authenticity established as a divine and ancient record with copious references to ancient and modern authorities by Elder Geo Reynolds, 1879. Salt Lake City, Utah, USA. And here's the index. It's actually a contents page, you believe. Unless they put the index at the front, it's usually at the back. Okay, it continues. The Book of Abraham, Chapter 1. Just going to enlarge it so you can read along with us if you wanted to. You can see it. Introductory. The discovery and subsequent history of the mummies. Translation of the papyrus by the prophet Joseph Smith. The late republication of the Pearl of Great Price has drawn renewed attention to the Book of Abraham, which forms a portion of its contents, and as but very little has ever been said by the elders of the church in advocacy of its claims, as an inspired record written by one prophet of God in the infancy of the earth's history, and translated by another prophet of the Most High in the dispensation of the fullness of times, we think that a few chapters written to prove its genuineness and divine origin will not be without value to the Latter-day Saints and to the world at large. For while the people of God have said or written little in its defence, there have been those opposed to the revelations of God in these days, who have rigorously attacked it, who have styled its language gibberish, and classed it among the pious frauds that have so often disgraced the history of religion, Christian and heathen. They therefore held, and they had confidence that they could prove by history, science, and in various other ways, that the Book of Abraham is exactly what it claims to be, and that it was translated by the wisdom and power of God for the benefit of the human family by the prophet Joseph Smith. Before entering into the discussion of its contents, these writers deemed it advisable to say a few words with regard to the manner in which it fell into the possession of the martyred prophet Joseph Smith. The account he gives in his history of this incident is to be found under the date of December 30, 1835, Volume 15, Millennial Star, from which they condense. He stated that the records from which the Book of Abraham was translated were found in one of the catacombs near the city of Thebes in Egypt in the year 1831 by a French traveller named Antonio Lebolo, who had received permission from Mehmet Ali, the then ruler of Egypt, to open it. After vast labour, an entrance was effected on the 7th of July, 1831. Okay, it's got a note here, Sebolo or Lebolo. Okay, so it was effected on the 7th of July, 1831, and several hundred mummies discovered there in various stages of decomposition. M. Sebolo obtained 11 of the, or Lebolo, someone's put an L over it, obtained 11 of the best preserved mummies and started with them for Paris, the capital of France. On the way he was taken sick, and after an illness of 10 days he died at Trieste. In his will he left these valued remains of ancient Egyptian art to his nephew, Mr. M. H. Chandler, and after various vicissitudes they came into this latter gentleman's possession in April 1833. He proceeded to make a living by the exhibition and travelled around the country for that purpose, reaching Kirtland July 3rd, 1835. In the meantime, he had opened the coffins and found that in connection with two of the bodies was something rolled up with the same kind of linen, saturated with the same bitumen, which, when examined, proved to be 2 rolls of papyrus. 2 or 3 other small pieces of papyrus with astronomical calculations, epitaphs, etc. were found with others of the mummies. In Joseph's history is the following account of Mr. C's visit to Kirtland. On the 3rd of July, Michael H. Chandler came to Kirtland to exhibit some Egyptian mummies. There were 4 human figures, together with some 2 or more rolls of papyrus, covered with hieroglyphic figures and devices. As Mr. Chandler had been told he could translate them, he brought him some of the characters, and he gave him the interpretation, and like a gentleman he gave him the following certificate. Kirtland, July 6, 1835. This is to make known to all who may be desirous concerning the knowledge of Mr. Joseph Smith, Jr., in deciphering the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic characters in his possession, which he has in many eminent cities, showed to the most learned, and from the information that he could ever learn or meet with, he found that Mr. Joseph Smith, Jr., to correspond in the most minute matters. Michael H. Chandler, travelling with and proprietor of Egyptian mummies. The Prophet, a few days later, writes, soon after this, some of the saints in Kirtland purchased the mummies in the papyrus, and this particular person, with W. W. Phelps and O. Cowdery as scribes, commenced the translation of some of the characters or hieroglyphics, and much to their joy, found that some of the rolls contained the writings of Abraham, another the writings of Joseph of Egypt, etc., a more full account of which will appear in their places as this writer proceeds to examine and unfold them. Truly, he could say, the Lord is beginning to reveal the abundance of peace and truth. From this time, it appeared from the history that Joseph set himself, Joseph Smith, diligently to work to translate the records as often as other important duties permitted. Under date of October 1st, he records in his journal, this afternoon I laboured on the Egyptian alphabet in company with brothers O. Cowdery and W. W. Phelps, and during the research, the principles of astronomy, as understood by Father Abraham and the ancients, unfolded to our understandings. It is desirable that these dates in fact should be remembered, as they have an important bearing on our future inquiries. Their future inquiries. Under dates of October 7th, November 24th, and in other places, he refers to his labours in translating the papyrus. He also makes frequent references to showing his friends these records and of explaining to them their contents, not only to those in the church, but to numbers who were not members. And these writers would simply cite one instance. December 16, 1835, elders McLellan, B. Young and J. Carter called and paid him a visit, with which he was much gratified. He exhibited and explained the Egyptian records to them, and explained many things concerning the dealings of God with the ancients and the formation of the planetary system. The next thing deemed in order is to give the prophet's description of the appearance of the papyrus, which description, they remark in passing, is identical with that of President John Taylor, who frequently saw them when in brother Joseph Smith's possession. The latter writes, and this is Ibid, volume 15, page 550. Before proceeding further, it will doubtless be desirable to give a slight sketch of the contents of those portions of the Book of Abraham, already translated and published. It opens with a short account of his early life at the home of his father in Ur of Chaldea, of the persecutions he suffered for righteousness' sake from his idolatrous kindred, and of the causes that led him to leave Chaldea for Canaan. It gives at greater length than does the Bible the covenants made with him by the Almighty, and affords some exceedingly interesting details with regard to the history of the priesthood in that early day. Further on, an account of Abraham's visit to Egypt is given, and the revelation of God to him with regard to the order of the planetary worlds, the conditions of the spirits of mankind in their pre-existent state, and the history of the creation of this earth are laid before the reader in plain and simple. Okay, above here in the Bible it says God spoke to him and says he was going to give him this land, this promised land of milk and honey, and then he would be the father of many nations, etc., etc. He'll be blessed. Anyone that cursed him, watch out. Anybody that blessed him got blessings, and so forth. Okay, so the history of the creation of this earth are laid before the reader in plain and simple but inspired and soul-inspiring language. In a soul-inspiring language. No short synopsis can give any idea of the beauty, grandeur and value of the truths made manifest by the Most High to his friend and servant Abraham, truths which the world today in part ignores and partly comprehends, or partly understands. These writers suggest to their readers, the study of this important though brief fragment, feeling assured that they will arise from its perusal, or looking at it, with a more exalted and more comprehensive realization of the power, the glory and the love of God than the study of any uninspired treatise could ever give, no matter how beautiful its language or how sublime its thoughts. It was the writer's intention, as they passed along, to take up the various subjects treated in the Book of Abraham and demonstrate the exact truthfulness of the record by the writings of historians, ancient and modern, by the discoveries of archaeologists, Egyptologists, astronomers and other scientists, and prove, they believe, beyond the possibility of successful contradiction that an element of fraud enters into its composition. So remarkable have been the confirmatory evidences that they have met in their investigation into the subject that they are of the opinion that there is not a book in existence whose genuineness can be more easily proven than can that of the record of the father of the faithful, or Joseph Smith probably, being, or maybe that could be Abraham. Being thus fully assured, the writers shall, or laid the forthcoming chapters before their readers with the joyful assurance that they will add to the already incontrovertible testimonies that Joseph Smith was a prophet, seer and revelator and servant of the Most High God. And they make this last statement advisedly because it must be evident to all who seriously consider the matter that if the Book of Abraham as given to them by Joseph Smith be true, it must have been translated by a greater than human power. They well know that, or they claim to well know that so far as the wisdom of this world is concerned, Joseph Smith was an unlearned man, unskilled in the higher branches of science, with little other knowledge than that which heaven conferred, or laid upon him. But had he been a scientist of the highest order, the production of the Book of Abraham would be but little less remarkable, as many of the truths taught therein, or inside it, as you'll presently see if you read this book, and they are in advance of the times and were as unknown to the sage as to the simpleton in the year that the papyrus was translated, and indeed for many years afterward. Consequently, human learning and human wisdom could not give them to the world. By some other power which they claim, these writers claim, was divine, they must have been revealed and made manifest. Revealed to Joseph Smith and then revealed to all these others as a revelation from God. Chapter 2. Abraham's early life and human sacrifices, causes which led Abraham to leave Chaldea. Confirmatory testimony of Joshua, Josephus, the book of Judith, etc. Of the early history of Abraham's life, very little is said in the book of Genesis. The mere fact is stated that his father's dwelling place was in Ur of the Chaldees, where the patriarch married his kinswoman Sarai, where also his brother Haran died. Genesis chapter 11. So she was Sarai. Say here that Abraham married his own relation. Someone similar to him. Supposedly, it was his half sister. Same father, different mother. After these events, it is recorded, Terah, his father, took a portion of the family and removed to Haran, where he dwelt until the day of his death, but the causes that led to his removal are not given. The next chapter opens with the command of God to Abraham, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, with thy peoples, etc. But the reason why God gave him that command are not mentioned, not even hinted at. The book of Abraham supplies many interesting details on this point, not to be found in the history given by Moses. And that the details thus supplied are consistent with the condition of life in Egypt and Chaldea at that time, and in many respects corroborated with by the writings and sayings of men living in later ages. It now becomes the writer's business to prove. Abraham states in the second paragraph into which his book had been divided that his fathers had turned from their righteousness and from the holy commandments which the Lord their God had given unto them, unto the worship of the gods of the heathens, and that they turned their hearts to the sacrifices of the heathen and offering up their children unto their dumb idols. So that would be Moloch. Okay? Putting their children into the arms, the infants into the arms of Moloch, and they get burnt up. In the next paragraph it is written, now at this time it was the custom of the priest of Pharaoh, or the king of Egypt, to offer up upon the altar which had been built in the land of Chaldea for the offering unto these strange gods, men, women and children. A little further on Abraham writes, and it came to pass that the priest laid violence upon him, that they might slay him also. In the book of Abraham 1:12 by the looks of it, these notes on the side. And as they lifted up their hands upon me that they might offer me up and take away my life. Look, take notice, I lifted up my voice unto the Lord my God, and the Lord hearkened and heard, and he filled me with the vision of the Almighty, and the angel of his presence stood by me, and immediately loosened my bands, and his voice was unto me, Abraham. Abraham, behold, my name is Jehovah, and I have heard thee, and I have come down to deliver thee, and to take thee away from thy father's house, and from all thy kinsfolk, into a strange land that thou knowest not of, and this because they have turned their hearts away from me, to worship the god of Elkanah, and the god of Libnah, and the god of Makra, and the god of Korash, and the god of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Therefore I, God, am come down to visit them, and to destroy him who hath lifted up his hand against thee, Abraham, my son, to take away thy life. To substantiate the truthfulness of the above statements, we ought to be able to bring testimony in favour of 4 points. First, that human sacrifice was practiced in Egypt and adjacent countries in Abraham's day. Second, that Abraham's fathers were idolaters. Third, that he was persecuted by his fellow countrymen because he opposed the idolatry. We don't remember that in the book of Genesis, because the lineage shown there is the Hebrews, the Awer, and then they make this journey, they cross over, they make this passage, and so forth into another land. But prior to that, Abraham's father dies, so they stop at Haran, and then they move on to this land of milk and honey. God commanded Abraham to leave Chaldea because his father's house had turned their hearts away from him to the worship of strange gods. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that if they were Hebrews or Awer. Not too sure now. As the above points can be proven by other testimony than that of the book of Abraham, these writers think they have strong evidence that the record is historically correct. Admit this, and they have taken a very decided step towards acknowledging the authenticity of the entire work. For it is very improbable, nay almost absurd, to imagine that Joseph Smith, with his limited range of ancient historical knowledge, could have produced a work of this kind that would be historically correct. Had the work been a forgery, that is, had it originated with Joseph Smith, the probabilities are overwhelming that he would have made some egregious blunders which could easily have been detected, and the whole affair from beginning to end proven a tissue of falsehoods. Firstly, then, we have to show that human sacrifices were offered to the strange gods of the heathen in Abraham's day, more particularly to Egypt, as it is represented that it was the priest of Pharaoh who officiated on the occasions mentioned by the patriarch. To substantiate this point, the writers make but one quotation, as its author mentions so many other historians, ancient and modern, as his authorities, that in quoting it they call upon them to become their witnesses. Also, it is taken from Dissertation 2, Whiston's Josephus, and is as follows. It is evident from Sanchoniatho, Manetho, Pausanias, Diodorus, Siculus, Philo, Plutarch, and Porphyry, sounds like they're all Greeks, that such human sacrifices were frequent both in Phoenicia and Egypt, and that long before the days of Abraham, as Sir John Marsham and Bishop Cumberland have fully proved, nay, that in other places, though not in Egypt, this cruel practice continued long after Abraham. These writers may then here draw attention to the statement that this cruel practice did not continue in Egypt after Abraham's day, owing, they doubt not, as will hereafter be shown, to the great influence that patriarch wielded in later life with Pharaoh and his subjects in favour of a more perfect way of serving heaven. Again, that Abraham's fathers were idolaters, though the book of Genesis carries no such inferences, as also that Abraham was commanded by Jehovah to leave his father's house because of this idolatry. It's proven, they consider it by the following chapters. They first turn to the book of Judith in the Apocrypha, chapters 5, verses 6 to 9. It is there represented that when the invading hosts of the king of Nineveh were approaching the land of Israel, the commanding general made some inquiries with regard to the history of its people. Then Achor, captain of all the sons of Ammon, in answer to his inquiries, replied, "This people are descended of the Chaldeans, and they adjourned heretofore in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of Chaldea. For they left the way of their ancestors and worshipped the God of heaven, the God whom they knew, so they cast him out from the face of their gods," with little g, and they fled into Mesopotamia, and sojourned there many days. From the above, it is very evident that the facts relating to the call of Abraham were not only well known to the Hebrews, but to the people of the surrounding nations also. As Achor was one in the high authority among the sons of Ammon, his words under the peculiar circumstances in which they were uttered would carry great weight, and if unauthorized would meet with severe criticism and probable contradiction. But the question is forever set at rest by the words of a greater than Achor. Joshua, the valiant, God-fearing leader of Israel, shortly before his death, gathered the people together and rehearsed in their hearing the great things the Lord had before time done for them. It is written that at this time, as footnote indication underneath, Joshua chapter 24, verses 2 and 3, Joshua said unto all the people, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor or Nachor, and they served other gods. And I took your father Abraham from the other side of the flood and led him through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his seed." And again, Joshua 24, verse 14-15. "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose ye this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Further evidence that this we deem unnecessary, or the writers deem unnecessary, as here they have the end of all controversy, even the word of the Lord on the matter. They could not prove directly from the writings of any authors, at their disposal that an attempt was made to take Abraham's life for righteousness' sake. But they could show from the antiquities of Josephus that he was maltreated for that cause. Well, we have to look at those ones. The historian, after referring to the doctrines taught by Abraham regarding God, writes, for which doctrines, when the Chaldeans and other people of Mesopotamia raised a tumult against him, he thought it fit to leave that country, and at the commandment by the assistance of God he came and lived in the land of Canaan. As far as we know, the book of Genesis just says God told him, gather up your kinfolk, etc., and head for this land, this promised land, the land of Canaan. And he started to, but his father obviously died. Terah died in Haran, so he stayed there for a while, and then he moved on. So we've read so much of this book so far, we'd have to look at it further. So apparently Abraham is in Egypt, and he must have been there for a while, because he wrote pages and pages on papyrus or text on papyrus while there. And this Joseph Smith has supposed to got hold of these original texts, and okay, we so basically God told him you had to leave, gather up your kinfolk, and go to this other land of Canaan that I'm giving you. Okay? So I'm not too sure about this, because he claimed to have translated the hieroglyphics of an Egyptian scroll that he'd found in a mummy's coffin, and so forth. So could it be possible that he was a total fraudster and kept writing these fraudulent texts, etc., and then claiming, well, it was left me by the angel Moroni or something like that? Well, this was it was you all just making it up, okay? Making it all up. We're thinking, did they actually write things down in Abraham's day, or did they use pictographs and everything was oral? They passed it down through oral lessons and perfecting, total memory recall and so forth, way before they came across had a cuneiform style of writing and wrote on clay. We're not too sure on that one. Was he a real prophet, or was he a fake? Is this really the book of Abraham, or is it fake? You decide.